The wind howled through the dense Appalachian forest, carrying with it a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. Jake, Ryan, and Liz had been hiking for most of the day, following a rugged trail deep into the mountains. It was supposed to be a weekend getaway, just the three of them, a tent and miles of untouched wilderness. No cell service, no distractions, just nature. By late afternoon, the sunlight had started to wane, casting long shadows between the towering trees. The forest was eerily silent, save for the occasional rustling of unseen animals. The trio stopped near an old wooden signpost, barely legible from years of wear. "Hey, check this out," Liz said, running her fingers over the faded lettering. "Something about Devil's Hollow? Sounds inviting." Ryan scoffed. "Probably just some dumb legend to keep people out. Let's set up camp before it gets dark." The three of them moved off trail, finding a small clearing surrounded by gnarled trees. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the air grew thick, and an unsettling quiet settled over them. Jake, always the most superstitious, glanced around uneasily. "Doesn't this place feel off?" he muttered. Liz rolled her eyes. "It's just a forest, Jake. We're fine." But Jake couldn't shake the feeling. There was something about the place, the way the trees seemed to lean inward, the way the air felt unnaturally heavy. He wasn't sure if it was paranoia or something real. That night, they sat around a small fire, sharing ghost stories and laughing off their unease. The fire crackled, sending shadows dancing across the trees. Liz, ever the skeptic, grinned. "You guys ever hear the legend of the lost hiker?" she asked. Ryan leaned forward. "Oh, this should be good." Liz smirked. "So, a long time ago, a guy went missing up here. Supposedly he was a fur trapper who got lost in a storm. They never found his body, but hikers swear they still see him wandering the trails at night, looking for his way home. They say if you see him, you should never ever follow." Jake shuddered. "Why not?" Liz lowered her voice. "Because he'll lead you somewhere you can't come back from." Ryan laughed, shaking his head. "Come on, this is just campfire nonsense." Just then, the wind picked up, making the flames dance wildly. A distant sound echoed through the trees, a faint whisper, too quiet to make out. Jake stiffened. "Did you hear that?" Liz waved him off. "It's just the wind." But the sound came again. This time, it was closer, a soft, raspy voice. "Help me." The three of them froze. The whisper wasn't carried by the wind. It was distinct, deliberate. Ryan grabbed his flashlight, aiming it toward the trees. "Hello?" he called. No answer. Then, movement. A figure, just beyond the reach of the firelight, standing at the edge of the trees. A man. His clothes were ragged, his face obscured by shadows. He stood unnaturally still, as if he were waiting for something. Liz's voice wavered. Who are you?" The figure didn't respond. Then, slowly, he turned and started walking away, deeper into the forest. "Help me." His voice was hollow, desperate. Ryan stood. "Maybe he's a lost hiker." Jake grabbed his arm. "Are you crazy? Didn't Liz just say never to follow?" Ryan hesitated, but Liz stood up beside him. "What if he's really lost? We should at least see if he needs help." Before Jake could argue, Liz clicked on her flashlight and followed after the man. Ryan, shaking his head at Jake's cowardice, went after her. Jake cursed under his breath, but had no choice. He wasn't about to let them wander off alone. The deeper they went, the quieter the forest became. Even the wind seemed to die. The figure ahead of them moved at a steady pace, never looking back. Then, abruptly, he stopped. They had reached a clearing. In the center, an old, rotting cabin stood, its wooden planks weathered with age. The man lingered at the cabin's door, his posture rigid. Then, without a word, he stepped inside. Jake felt his stomach drop. "This is a bad idea." Ryan ignored him and pushed forward, stepping onto the creaking porch. The door was slightly ajar, revealing only darkness inside. Liz hesitated. Maybe we should just go back." Ryan sighed. "You were the one who wanted to help." With that, he pushed the door open and stepped inside. Liz followed reluctantly. Jake, cursing under his breath, brought up the rear. The cabin was suffocatingly dark, the air thick with decay. The floor groaned beneath their weight. Their flashlights illuminated broken furniture, tattered curtains, and something far worse, deep scratches on the walls. Not animal scratches, hand scratches, as if someone had tried to claw their way out. Jake swallowed hard. "Let's go, now." Then, from the darkness, bang! The door slammed shut behind them. Liz screamed. Ryan spun around, yanking at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Then, a whisper. "You shouldn't have come." Their flashlights flickered wildly. In the shifting light, they saw him, the lost hiker. But now his face was visible. His skin was shriveled and gray, his eyes sunken and hollow. His mouth hung open in an unnatural scream, though no sound came out. He took a step toward them. Jake stumbled back. "What do you want?" The figure raised a trembling hand, pointing at the walls. Their beams followed, and they saw the words carved into the wood. "Follow me and you will never leave." The cabin trembled. The walls groaned. The air grew thick with whispers, hundreds of voices overlapping in a chorus of despair. Ryan pounded on the door. "Let us out!" The lost hiker's head twitched violently. His mouth moved, but his words weren't his own. "You're already lost." Suddenly, Liz screamed. Something cold had wrapped around her wrist. The shadows were moving, reaching. Jake grabbed Liz's arm and yanked her away. The cabin was collapsing in on itself, the walls stretching and distorting like a living thing. Then, a voice. Not the lost hikers. Something older. "Run!" The door flung open on its own. They didn't hesitate. They bolted through the trees, the air filled with those horrible whispers. The forest seemed to twist and stretch, the trees clawing at them as they ran. When they finally broke through the tree line, they collapsed onto the dirt path. The whispers stopped. The forest behind them was silent. Ryan was gasping. Liz was shaking. Jake turned back, expecting to see the clearing, but there was nothing. No cabin. No sign they had ever left the trail. Only the old wooden signpost stood nearby. And now the lettering was clear. Devil's Hollow. Do not follow. They never spoke of that night again. But as they left the forest, Jake swore he heard it. A whisper. "Help me," from just beyond the trees.
Story number 2.
The group had been planning this trip for months. A weekend in the Rocky Mountains, deep in the wilderness, far from civilization. No cell service, no distractions, just the 5 of them, their gear, and endless miles of dense forest. Ethan, the self-proclaimed leader, had mapped out a route that wasn't on most hiking guides. It was an old trail, barely used, winding through a valley where few dared to go. Locals warned against it, speaking in hushed tones about how people had gotten lost there, how some never made it back. But that only made it more appealing to them. "This is going to be legendary," Ethan had said as they set off that morning. By the time the sun dipped below the jagged peaks, they were miles into the forest. The trail was steep and overgrown, the trees towering above them like silent sentinels. The deeper they went, the more unnatural the air felt, thick, stagnant, as if the wind itself refused to pass through. Mia, the most cautious of the group, glanced around uneasily. "Anyone else feel weird?" "Define weird," Jason muttered, adjusting his pack. "Like we're being watched," she admitted. Lena, always the skeptic, scoffed. "It's a forest. Of course, there are animals." But it didn't feel like animals. By the time they found a suitable clearing to set up camp, night had fully settled in. They built a fire, the flickering glow barely pushing back the encroaching darkness. The trees seemed closer now, looming in unnatural angles. As they ate, laughing and talking, a sudden rustling noise snapped them into silence. It came from beyond the tree line, slow and deliberate. Ethan smirked. Probably just a deer. Mia wasn't so sure. The sound didn't fade like an animal moving away. It stopped the moment they acknowledged it. She shuddered. "Let's just get some sleep." As they crawled into their tents, the forest seemed to exhale around them, the air growing colder. Somewhere in the night, Mia woke up. The fire had died down to embers, casting long skeletal shadows. She could hear breathing. Low, rasping. Not from inside the tent, from outside. She held her breath. The breathing was close, just beyond the thin layer of fabric separating her from whatever was out there. A slow, scraping sound followed, like something dragging along the ground. Then a whisper. Not words, just a sound, like something imitating a human voice, but not quite right. She squeezed her eyes shut, her body rigid. Minutes passed, maybe an hour. Then silence. She must have drifted off because when she opened her eyes again, dawn was breaking. She sat up and unzipped the tent, stepping out into the cool morning air. The others were stirring, but something immediately caught her attention. The ground. Around their tents, the dirt was disturbed. Long, deep drag marks crisscrossed the campsite, like something had been moving around them all night. Jason cursed. What the hell made these? Lena ran a hand through her hair, looking shaken. Could have been a bear? No tracks, Ethan said, frowning. Just dragging. Mia's stomach churned. She wanted to leave. Now. But Ethan, ever the adventurer, dismissed her fears. We came all this way. We're not turning back over some weird marks in the dirt. Reluctantly, they pressed on. By midday, the trail had nearly disappeared, swallowed by the forest. The trees grew denser, their trunks twisted unnaturally. The deeper they went, the quieter the world became. No birds, no rustling leaves, no sound at all. It was as if the forest were holding its breath. Then Lena stopped abruptly. What is that? They all turned to where she was pointing. A cabin. It stood in a small clearing, weathered and ancient. Its wooden planks blackened with age. Vines crawled up the walls and the door hung slightly ajar. There were no windows. Not on the map, Ethan muttered. Jason chuckled nervously. Yeah, no shit. Mia's chest tightened. We should keep moving. We should keep moving. But Ethan, ever the explorer, was already stepping forward. Come on, this is awesome. Mia grabbed his arm. Ethan, no. But he shook her off. Just a quick look. He stepped onto the porch, the wood groaning under his weight. He peered inside. Guys, you need to see this. Reluctantly, the others joined him. Inside, dust coated everything. The air was thick with decay. The cabin was almost bare, save for a single wooden table and something in the far corner. A pile of clothing. Old, tattered, layered with age. Jason swallowed. Okay, that's weird. Then Lena let out a strangled gasp. Near the clothing, the wall was covered in scratch marks. Not animal scratches, human fingernails. Mia turned to leave. We're going. Now. But as she stepped back, the cabin creaked. The others froze. A new sound filled the space. Dragging. From the back of the cabin, something shifted. The shadows moved. Mia didn't wait. She bolted. The others followed, crashing through the trees, the air thick with an unnatural whispering. They didn't stop running until they reached the trail. Their lungs burned, their legs shook. Only then did they turn back. The cabin was gone. Nothing but trees. No clearing. This is no sign it had ever been there. They didn't speak, just kept moving. The sun was sinking by the time they reached their first campsite. Relief flooded them. They would rest, then leave, first thing in the morning. But as they set up their tents, Mia noticed something that sent ice through her veins. The ground. The same drag marks as before. But now they weren't just around the tents. They led to them, from the trees. Mia's breath hitched. It followed us. Then, rustling. Slow, deliberate, they turned toward the trees. A figure stood just beyond the firelight, not a person. Its arms were too long, its head slightly tilted as if studying them. It didn't move. It just watched. Then, in a voice too familiar, too wrong, it whispered, Ethan. Ethan screamed. They ran, blindly, desperately through the trees. The whispering followed, repeating their names. Mia, Lena, Jason, Ethan. It was inside their heads. The next thing Mia knew, she was stumbling onto gravel, a road, civilization. She collapsed, gasping. The others tumbled out beside her. They turned back. The forest was silent. The figure was gone. The authorities found no record of a cabin in that valley, no missing persons reports that matched the clothing they found. But the worst part? When Mia checked her phone days later, she found a recording she didn't remember taking. A low, garbled whisper, her own voice, repeating their names.
Story number 3.
The trail had no name on the map. It was just a thin, winding line that cut through the thick pine forest of Montana. Dean, Olivia, Marcus, and Sarah had planned this trip for months, eager to escape the stress of city life. A 3-day hike, deep into the wilderness, away from everything. They had heard rumors about the area, strange disappearances, eerie noises at night, but they brushed them off. Urban legends, campfire stories meant to scare kids. Now, on the second day of their hike, Dean was starting to think they should have listened. The forest was too quiet, no birds, no rustling leaves. Even the wind had died. Olivia adjusted her backpack and sighed. We should have reached the lake by now. Marcus checked the map again. We're on the right path. It should be just ahead. Sarah wiped sweat from her forehead. Feels like we've been walking in circles. Dean frowned, glancing at the trees. She was right. The forest all looked the same twisted, gnarled trees, their bark peeling like dead skin, the same massive roots curling out of the earth. Then a noise, a clicking sound, sharp, rhythmic, like fingernails tapping against wood. They all froze. What was that? Olivia whispered. Marcus scanned the trees. Woodpecker? Dean swallowed hard. No, it's too slow. Click, click, click. The sound echoed around them. Then silence. Sarah forced a laugh. Okay, that was creepy. Can we keep moving? No one argued. They walked faster, the trees closing in around them. The path was narrowing, forcing them into a single-file line. Then Olivia gasped. The trail had ended. Where there should have been a lake, there was nothing but dirt. A dried-out pit, cracked and lifeless. This doesn't make sense, Marcus said, turning in a slow circle. It was supposed to be here. Sarah's voice was tight. Maybe we should turn back. Dean nodded. But as they turned, something moved in the trees, a shadow, just at the edge of their vision, long limbs, unnatural stillness. Then the clicking started again. Louder this time, closer. Marcus raised his flashlight, his hands shaking. Hello? Silence, then a voice. But it wasn't coming from the trees, it was coming from above. A low whisper, distorted and wrong. Lost. Sarah let out a choked scream. They looked up. Something was clinging to the tree above them. Its limbs were too long, too thin. Its fingers ended in jagged, pointed nails. Its face was wrong, stretched like melted wax, its mouth hanging open in a silent scream. It dropped. They ran, blindly crashing through the underbrush, ignoring the branches tearing at their skin. The clicking followed, fast, frantic, chasing them. Dean's foot caught on something. He hit the ground hard, knocking the air from his lungs. Someone grabbed him, pulling him up. Olivia, move. They burst into a clearing. The clicking stopped. Panting, they spun around. The trees were still. Sarah clutched her chest. What the hell was that? No one answered. Then Marcus pointed. On the other side of the clearing stood a cabin. Old. Rotten. The door barely hanging from its hinges. This wasn't on the map, Dean muttered. Olivia shook her head. We're not going in there. Sarah exhaled shakily. We don't have a choice. It's getting dark. Against their better judgment, they stepped inside. The air was heavy, thick with dust and decay. The floorboards groaned under their weight. There was almost nothing inside, just a table, a broken chair, and something carved into the far wall. Scratches. Deep, erratic gouges, like someone had tried to claw their way out. And words. Don't look at it. Marcus turned to the others, his face pale. Don't look at what? A new sound filled the cabin. Not clicking. Scraping. From under the floor. Sarah whimpered. Oh my God. Dean took a shaky step back. We have to leave. Now. The scraping stopped. Then a whisper. Low. Drawn out. You looked. The floor exploded. Something shot up from the darkness below. Too fast, too wrong. Marcus screamed. Hands, too many hands, dragged him down. Gone. Just like that. Sarah collapsed, sobbing. Dean grabbed her. Move. They ran from the cabin. The trees were different now. Twisted, shifting. The path was gone. They were trapped. Then a voice from all around them. You looked. Dean turned. It was there. The thing from the trees. But now it had Marcus's face. Its mouth twisted into a grotesque grin. Click, click, click. Dean ran. Branches tore at him. His breath burned. Then, light, blinding, sudden. He stumbled forward, onto gravel, a road. A car horn blared. Dean collapsed. When he woke up, he was in a hospital. Olivia and Sarah were there. But Marcus was gone. The police searched. No sign of him. No cabin. No trail. It was as if he had never existed. But sometimes when Dean closes his eyes, he hears it. The clicking. The whisper. You looked.
Story number 4.
The trail had been abandoned for years. That's what made it perfect. Matt, Jamie, and Tyler had been hiking together for nearly a decade, always looking for the next big challenge. When Tyler found an old map leading to a place called Dead Man's Ridge, they couldn't resist. It was barely documented, its trailhead hidden deep in the Colorado wilderness. The few stories they did find online were vague, mentions of strange lights, missing hikers, and unsettling sounds. But nothing concrete. Probably just a local legend, Matt had said. You know how people love to make up ghost stories. They regretted those words the moment they stepped onto the trail. It was too quiet. No birds, no rustling leaves, just the sound of their boots crunching against the dry dirt path. The deeper they went, the heavier the air became, thick with something they couldn't quite name. By the time the sun began to set, an eerie fog had started rolling in, swallowing the trees one by one. Tyler checked his GPS. We should be close to an old ranger cabin. If it's still standing, we can camp there. Jamie hesitated. Are we sure this is a good idea? Matt grinned. What, scared? Jamie rolled her eyes, but the uneasy feeling in her gut didn't go away. 20 minutes later, the cabin emerged from the fog like a forgotten relic. It was barely holding together, its wooden planks warped with age. This thing looks like it'll collapse on us, Jamie muttered. Tyler shrugged. Better than sleeping outside. The inside was worse. The floor was littered with leaves and debris. Old, moldy furniture sat in the corners, untouched for years. But the worst part was the smell. Damp wood mixed with something else. Something rotting. They ignored it. Set up their sleeping bags, ate their protein bars, tried to shake the growing sense of unease. That night, they heard it. A whisper. Faint at first, just outside the cabin. Jamie sat up, heart pounding. Did you hear that? Matt groaned. Go back to sleep. But Tyler was already reaching for his flashlight. The whispering grew louder. Closer. Then came the scratching. Fingernails, long, jagged, dragging along the cabin walls. Matt shot up. What the hell is that? Tyler was already moving toward the window. Maybe an animal? He shined his light outside. The fog pressed against the glass like a living thing, shifting and swirling. Then something moved, a figure just beyond the tree line. Thin. Wrong. Its head cocked at an unnatural angle, and then it ran. Straight for the cabin. Tyler stumbled back as something slammed into the door. Jamie screamed. The whispering was inside now. A voice that wasn't theirs. You shouldn't be here. The door burst open. The figure stood in the doorway. It was tall. Its limbs too long, its fingers stretching out like claws. But the worst part? Its face. Because it didn't have one. Just smooth, pale skin where its eyes and mouth should have been. Then it smiled. A mouth split open, jagged and wide. Matt grabbed Jamie's arm. Run. They tore through the trees, the fog swallowing them whole. Branches whipped against their faces. The ground seemed to shift beneath their feet. But the whispering never stopped. It followed. Grew louder. Matt tripped. The second he hit the ground, something grabbed his ankle. Cold, wet, wrong. He kicked, screamed, scrambled forward. Tyler and Jamie yanked him up, pulling him along. Then, suddenly, they were back at the trailhead. Their car was there. The forest was silent. Had they imagined it? No, because when they turned back toward the trees, they saw it. Standing there, watching, still smiling. And then in a voice that sounded like all of them speaking at once, it whispered, "See you soon."
Story number 5.
The old man at the gas station warned them. You kids don't want to go up that mountain, he said, squinting at them beneath his stained baseball cap. People go up there and don't come back. Or when they do, they ain't right. Matt, Lauren, and Danny exchanged amused glances. Appreciate the concern, Danny said, grinning, but we're just doing a short hike. We'll be fine. The old man just shook his head. Suit yourself. But if you hear something whisper in your name, don't answer. They laughed about it in the car, just another small-town ghost story meant to scare outsiders. But as they reached the remote trailhead deep in the Appalachian Mountains, the laughter faded. The forest was dense, the trees gnarled and ancient, their branches twisting like skeletal fingers. The air was thick, damp, almost suffocating. A strange silence hung over the place. No birds, no rustling leaves, just the crunch of their boots against the dirt trail. Okay, Lauren said after about an hour. I'll admit, this place is kind of creepy. That's the fun part, Matt said, pushing ahead. Come on, the overlook should be just past this ridge. The climb grew steeper, the trees pressing in around them. Then a smell hit them. Rot, like something had been dead for days. Danny gagged. Jesus, what is that? Lauren covered her nose. Probably a deer or something. But Matt had stopped. He was staring at something just off the trail. A shoe. A single, mud-covered hiking boot. Still laced. Still attached to a foot. Danny cursed, stumbling backward. Lauren gasped. The leg was half buried in the undergrowth, the rest of the body lost in the thick foliage, but the skin they could see was bloated, blackened, as if it had been there for weeks. Matt pulled out his phone. No signal. Danny swallowed hard. We should go back. Report this. Lauren nodded quickly, but Matt hesitated, glancing up the trail. We're so close to the overlook. Danny grabbed his arm. Dude, screw the overlook. There's a dead guy here. The forest suddenly felt a lot darker. Matt sighed. All right, let's... Then they heard it. A whisper. Soft. Just behind them. Danny froze. Did you hear that? Lauren nodded slowly. Then, again, but this time it said his name. Danny. A breathy, elongated whisper, like wind through hollow bone. Danny spun around. Nothing but trees. Lauren grabbed his hand. We need to go, now. They turned back down the trail, moving faster. The whispering followed. Danny, Lauren, Matt. Low, almost playful. Coming from everywhere. Then the forest changed. The trees twisted. The undergrowth shifted. The trail they had taken up now seemed unfamiliar. Matt stopped short. Wait, where the hell are we? Danny's stomach dropped. We didn't take a turn, did we? Lauren spun in circles, eyes wild. This isn't the way back. The whispering laughed. Then something stepped onto the trail. A figure. Tall, thin, skin stretched too tight over elongated bones, but its face was Danny's, a grotesque, hollow-eyed version of him. Its mouth split wide in a jagged grin. It lifted a hand, its fingers too long, the nails splintered and blackened. Danny screamed. They ran, crashing through the undergrowth, ignoring the branches, slashing their faces, the roots snagging their feet. The whispering followed, multiplying. Matt tripped. Danny turned, reaching for him. But hands, too many hands, erupted from the ground, clawing at Matt's legs, dragging him downward. Help me. Danny and Lauren grabbed him, pulled as hard as they could. The hands were cold, slippery, wrong. Matt's face twisted in terror. "Don't let go," Danny screamed as Matt was ripped away, swallowed by the earth. Gone. The forest fell silent. Lauren's sobs were the only sound. Danny grabbed her wrist. "Run." They ran until they could barely breathe, then a break in the trees, a road. They collapsed onto the pavement. A car's headlights cut through the darkness. A man stepped out, a ranger looking at them in shock. "You kids all right?" Danny gasped, struggling to form words. "Our friend, Matt." But when he looked back at the trees, the forest was still. No whispering, no twisted trees, just silence. And Matt was gone. The rangers searched, no trace of him, no body. The only thing they found was an old, half-buried hiking boot. Not Matt's, a different one, older, rotten. Danny still dreams about that forest, and sometimes in the silence of the night, he hears it. A whisper, laughing, calling his name.
Story number 6.
The mountain had no official name, just a nickname passed down by locals, Howler's Peak. Jake, Aaron, and Scott didn't believe in superstitions, but they had heard the stories about hikers disappearing, about strange sounds in the night, about a thing that screamed. "It's just the wind," Scott had said, loading his backpack. People always make up scary crap about remote places. So they went. The first day was perfect. Clear skies, cool air, and a challenging but manageable trail. They set up camp on a plateau with an incredible view of the valley below. Then at sunset, the wind changed. It wasn't just a breeze. It was wrong. A deep, hollow wail through the trees, rattling their bones. Aaron shivered. "That doesn't sound like wind." Jake forced a grin. "It's a mountain. Wind does weird things up here." Scott agreed. "Yeah, it's nothing." They didn't sleep well. Around midnight, Jake woke up to movement outside the tent. Soft, slow, circling. He held his breath, listening. Then, a whisper. But it wasn't a voice, it was something breathing. Long, ragged exhales, like air forced through hollow lungs. Jake reached for his flashlight. He unzipped the tent just enough to peek out. A shape stood at the edge of the trees. Tall, thin, too thin. Its arms were long, hanging past its knees, and its head was wrong. Jake felt his stomach turn. It wasn't looking at him. It wasn't looking at anything. It had no face. Then it moved. Jake yanked the tent shut, his hands shaking. "Wake up," he hissed, shaking Scott and Aaron. Scott groaned. "Dude, what?" Then from just outside, the scream. High-pitched, splitting the air, not human, not animal. Aaron clamped a hand over her mouth to keep from screaming. Jake's blood ran cold. "We need to go, now." Scott nodded, already shoving gear into his pack. Screw this place. They didn't make it far. The forest had changed. The trail was gone. Trees stood too close together, twisting in ways that defied nature. The branches moved, shifting when they weren't looking. "We came from this way, right?" Aaron whispered. No one answered, because they didn't know. A new sound rose around them, not the scream, clicking, like teeth tapping together. Then a voice, low, crooning, mocking. "You shouldn't have come." Scott turned, his flashlight shaking. "Who's there?" Silence, then a hand curled around the trunk of a tree. Pale, long fingers, nails like claws, another hand, then a third, and the thing crawled out. It didn't walk, it slithered. Its head was sideways, its body bending in ways that should have been impossible. Then it grinned. Its mouth stretched wide, too wide. Jake didn't wait. "Run!" They crashed through the forest, lungs burning, branches clawing at their skin. The clicking followed. Faster. Jake turned back, grabbed his arm, too late. Scott's scream cut off as hands, too many hands, pulled him into the earth. Gone. Jake yanked Aaron forward. "Keep going." The trees blurred. The world twisted. Then a road. They stumbled onto the pavement, gasping. No clicking, no whispering, just silence. And when they turned back, the trees were normal. Scott was gone. And the thing that took him, it was watching. Still grinning, still waiting.
Story number 7.
The trail wasn't on any modern maps. Lena found it in an old guidebook from the 1960s, tucked away in the back of a used bookstore. The book called it Black Hollow Trail, a supposedly forgotten route deep in the Smoky Mountains. Probably overgrown by now, her boyfriend Mark had said. Might not even exist anymore. But Lena wanted to find it. Something about the idea of an undiscovered, abandoned path excited her. No tourists, no crowds. Just the quiet of the wilderness. She convinced Mark and their two friends, David and Jess, to go with her. A weekend backpacking trip. Just a few miles in, camp overnight, and hike back out. They should have turned around the moment they found the trailhead. The wooden sign was rotting, barely legible. The path itself was unnatural, too straight, too narrow, as if someone had cut through the trees in a single clean stroke. Mark hesitated. This doesn't feel right. Lena rolled her eyes. You scared of a trail? David laughed. Man, we've done way worse than this. Let's go. They hiked for hours, and the deeper they went, the quieter the world became. No birds, no wind, even their footsteps seemed swallowed by the dense, suffocating silence. Jess whispered, I don't like this. But there was no turning back now. As the sun dipped behind the trees, they set up camp in a small clearing. No one talked much. They ate in silence, like staring at the dying light. Then the voices started. Faint, distant, whispers just beyond the tree line. Mark stiffened. Did you hear that? Lena nodded, her mouth dry. David grabbed a flashlight and pointed at the trees. Nothing. Movement. A shape, just barely visible between the trunks. Too tall. Too thin. Jess gasped. What the hell is that? Mark grabbed Lena's arm. We need to go. Now. Then the whispering stopped, and something screamed. Not human, not animal, something else. The forest came alive. The trees shifted, the ground buckled, and the shape in the woods moved. Fast. Jess screamed as something rushed toward her. Mark pulled out his knife, but it didn't matter, because the thing wasn't real. It flickered, disjointed, as if it wasn't fully there. Then its face changed. It became Jess, smiling. Mouth too wide. Eyes wrong. David yelled, swinging his flashlight wildly. Run. They ran, through the impossible twisting trees, through the endless dark. The thing laughed, not from behind them, from all around them. The trail was gone. The woods shifted. Then Lena tripped. She hit the ground hard. Mark reached for her, but hands erupted from the dirt, grabbing his ankles. Mark's face twisted in terror. Lena, then. He was dragged under. The dirt swallowed him whole. Gone. Lena screamed. David grabbed her, pulling her forward. Jess was missing. They ran until they weren't in the forest anymore. They were standing on a road, back at the trailhead. Everything was quiet. The forest was normal. Jess and Mark were gone. No bodies, no sign they had ever been there, just the old rotting sign. And when Lena looked at it again, the name had changed. Welcome to Black Hollow. It wasn't a trail. It was a trap, and it was still waiting.
Story number 8.
The town of Briars Hollow had one rule: never hike Ravens Ridge after dark. Locals spoke of strange disappearances, of eerie lights flickering through the trees, of voices calling out from the darkness in familiar tones. Lena, Corey, and Sam didn't believe in ghost stories. They were experienced hikers, thrill seekers. The idea of an off-limits trail was too tempting to resist. People probably just get lost, Sam said, tightening the straps on her pack. We've got GPS, we'll be fine. So at dusk, they started up the trail. At first, it was just a normal hike, steep, winding, but manageable. Yet with every step, the air grew heavier, thicker. The trees loomed taller, their twisted branches clawing at the sky like skeletal fingers. Feels different up here, Corey muttered. Lena smirked. What, scared? He rolled his eyes, but his grip on his flashlight tightened. They reached a clearing just as night fully settled. It was unnaturally silent. No wind, no rustling leaves, just an overwhelming, suffocating stillness. Then, a whisper. Faint. Too faint to make out words. Lena turned. Did you hear that? Sam clicked on her flashlight, scanning the trees. Probably just an echo. The whispering came again. Louder, but this time it wasn't just noise. It said Lena's name. Her stomach twisted. Who's there? No answer. Then footsteps. Heavy, crunching in the undergrowth, coming closer. Corey's breath hitched. We need to go. They turned back toward the trail, but it was gone. The trees had shifted. The clearing was now surrounded by an unbroken wall of forest. Panic set in. This isn't possible, Sam stammered, checking her GPS. It says we're on the trail. Then light, deep in the trees, flickering, like a lantern swaying in the dark. Corey exhaled in relief. A campsite. Someone's out here. He stepped forward, and the light moved. Not like someone was carrying it, like it was floating. Sam grabbed his arm. Wait. The light stopped. And then more lights appeared. Dozens, surrounding them in a perfect circle, each one flickering, pulsing. Then from the dark, figures stepped forward. Tall, thin, featureless, not walking. Gliding. The whispering returned, swirling around them. The words clearer now. You came too late. Lena's heart pounded. Too late for what? The figures smiled. To leave. Then The lights went out, and the screaming began. Corey's, Sam's, then Lena's. But the town never found them, and by morning the trail was empty again, waiting for the next hikers to come.
Story number 9.
No one hiked Devil's Spine anymore, not since the incident in 1998. A group of college kids had gone up the ridge for a weekend camping trip. Only one came back, barefoot, covered in scratches, muttering things that didn't make sense. They found the campsite empty. No bodies, no tracks leading away, just a single phrase carved into a tree. It knows your name. No one ever found out what happened. But that didn't stop Matt, Rachel, and Tyler from going. People just get paranoid, Matt said, shouldering his pack. We'll be fine. Rachel hesitated. I don't know, guys. Something about this feels wrong. Tyler grinned. That's the fun part. They hiked up in the afternoon. The trail was steep, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and pine. By the time they reached the plateau, the sun had begun its slow descent behind the mountains. That's when the air changed. It became heavy, like stepping into a room where someone was waiting in the dark. Rachel rubbed her arms. Is it just me, or does it feel weird up here? Matt ignored her. Help me set up the tent. By nightfall, the forest was silent. Too silent. No crickets, no wind, just the distant, low hum of something unseen. They tried to ignore it, ate their dinner, talked about nothing. Then a voice. Soft, distant, calling Tyler's name. He froze. Did you hear that? Rachel's face had gone pale. I thought I imagined it. Matt frowned. Probably someone else camping nearby. But when they checked their phones, no service. Then it came again. Closer. Not a call. A whisper. Right behind them. Tyler spun, his flashlight cutting through the trees. Nothing. Rachel's breathing quickened. Guys, let's go back. Right now. Matt sighed. We're in the middle of nowhere, Rachel. There's no one out here. Then why did the whispering keep coming? And why, when it spoke this time, did it sound like Rachel? Tyler grabbed his pack. Screw this, I'm leaving. But when he turned toward the path, it wasn't there. The trees had moved. The trail was gone. The whispering became laughter. Low, mocking. Then the shapes appeared between the trees, tall, wrong, moving in jerky, unnatural ways. Rachel clutched Matt's arm. We need to run. But the figures were already too close. Their mouths opened, too wide, and they screamed. Matt felt something grab his wrist, cold, too many fingers. Then darkness, silence. By morning, the town found their campsite. No sign of them, just the words carved into a tree. It knows your name.
Story number 10.
The whispering woods sat on the edge of town, untouched for decades. The trees grew thick, their gnarled roots twisting over ancient stones. No one hiked there anymore. Not after what happened to the Graham family in 1979. They had gone camping one autumn night. A father, a mother, and their 2 young children. In the morning, the search party found their tent, shredded from the inside out. Blood stained the forest floor. No bodies, no tracks. Just 4 sets of teeth lined up neatly in the dirt. No one had an explanation. No animals could have done it. The town let the forest reclaim the trails, but some places don't like to be forgotten. Jaden, Maya, and Cole weren't from town. They had heard the stories. They didn't care. We're just going to check it out, Cole said, packing his gear. A quick night hike, get some cool pictures, and head back. Maya wasn't so sure. What if it's actually dangerous? Jaden smirked. What, you think a ghost is going to get us? They laughed about it, but as they stepped onto the overgrown path, the laughter faded. The trees loomed overhead, blocking out the stars. The air grew still, thick like wet velvet. No wind, no crickets, just silence. Then the first whisper. Maya froze. Did you hear that? Jaden shrugged. It's just wind. But there was no wind. They pressed on, the trail narrowing, branches twisting toward them. The deeper they went, the more the forest felt wrong. Then Cole stopped, his breathing shallow. Maya touched his arm. What's wrong? Cole pointed. Between the trees, a figure stood, still, watching. Its arms too long, fingers nearly touching the ground. Jaden raised his flashlight, and the thing vanished. Maya grabbed his wrist. Turn it off. What? Why? Then they heard it, a whisper, soft as breath against their ears. You shouldn't be here. Jaden's stomach twisted. Run. They ran. But the trail was gone. No markers, no path, just endless, shifting trees. Then the laughter started. Low, Maya gasped. Something's following us. Jaden turned. Cole was gone. Maya screamed. Cole! No answer. Then from the darkness, her voice, but it wasn't her. Jaden grabbed her wrist. Don't listen. The trees opened and Cole stepped out. smiling, but his eyes were wrong, and his mouth was full of teeth that weren't his. Jaden's flashlight flickered. Then the forest swallowed them whole. By morning, the search party found nothing. No footprints, no gear, just 3 sets of teeth lined up neatly in the dirt. The forest had taken them, like it always does.